you so much.
Thank you for that. Good morning. Oh, is that Motown? Oh, keep that going. Come on now. No, don't get me. Woo. You know what? I was just about to say when I saw the creativity slide come up, I want to be on the slide. So I think I would add to that I, having grown up in Detroit during the Motown era, I am a serious karaoke person. And if you turn on to Motown and some Temptations, I promise you I'm going to temptation walk all across the stage right here, right now. And I would welcome you to join me and do that. I am so delighted to be with y'all this morning, and I'm so glad that we got a chance to do this sort of community of practice work before we get to the larger conversation we're going to have today. Because I feel like there's some issues that we need to talk about together. Just the folks who are doing this work. We got some situations going on out here in these streets. Do y'all agree? Yeah, we got some. So we're going to talk about that. Before I get to the presentation and some of the lessons and conversations and recommendations I have for you about how we make the case for our organizations and what we do and why it matters and how we scale the resources we need to do it even better. I wanted to share with you our philosophy. I'm joined by my colleague, Samara. We go all across the country doing this work. In fact, yesterday I was stuck in airspace around Newark. I was going there for a talk in Newark, and we were on the plane, and they said that the air traffic control radar had gone out, and they didn't know what to do. So we were circling and circling, and finally they said, no, we just need to take you back to whole nother city because we can't. And to your point, Eddie, just in terms of we don't think about the systems that actually get us to safety until there's a moment when we think, oh, yeah, we kind of need that air traffic control stuff, can we? And I feel like as a country, we are in that moment where we are thinking about all the systems that we need that we don't often think about every day. And we're going, yeah, Social Security, oh, yeah. Community Development Block Grants, oh, yeah. New housing tax credit, low-income housing tax credit, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, the folks who give us Meals on Wheels, oh, yeah. Yeah, we forgot about that, lots of us, until it became apparent, right? As we're going through this whole exercise of what we are taking away, we have to think about how to break new ground. And that's what I'm gonna talk about today. Like, this is really a moment for us to actually break new ground. The ground that we knew before is changing, moving, shifting, that's okay, because we need to break some new ground, and that means thinking about the big, bold solutions that we want to harvest, right, in the next season. And a lot of what my colleagues and I at the CaseMade do is to try and be really, sorry, I'm gonna move away from this thing. Hold on, one second. I think I'm gonna walk around because I think I'm getting too much. There we go. Can you hear me now? Perfect, okay. So it's to think about the big, bold solutions that we need and how we make the case for them. Because to Eddie's point, when you are thinking about something big and bold for your communities and what you want to do, one of the first challenges that you want to cross is how do you convey that to other people? And one of the things I'll say to you is, if you are really forward thinking, you can see into the future, you know the things that you need to do for the next season of your organizations, you got to bring other people with you. And that's hard to do when you are so far ahead, right, of where we are today. And so part of what we do at the CaseMade is to try to, I think I'm still, sorry, am I still? Should I use the microphone? Turn this mic on? It's on. Sorry, folks, just give me 1 second. Okay, we're gonna need some more Motown music. That's what's really happening right here, right? So, there we go. So when we're trying to think about big solutions, we need folks who can help us understand how to get people around those solutions. So a lot of what we do is, and sometimes I would say to folks, if the dreams that you have for your community and your organization don't scare you a little bit at night, if you're not thinking at night about how in the heck am I gonna get people, right, to your point, Eddie, how in the heck am I gonna get people to rally around the thing that I know we need? If that doesn't scare you a little bit, if that doesn't keep you up at night, you're probably not dreaming big enough, right? Especially for a moment such as this. So a lot of what we do at the CaseMade is to help people not only dream big, but to launch, right, something around those big, bold, awesome dreams that for now they may be dreams, but if we work hard to get people behind us, can become the reality for tomorrow. We help them figure out what are the case making that they need, how do you make the case for it, and then to design a unified way to talk about it so you can hold folks together, what we call activate. You can activate them over the long term to do it. And we've been probably all over the country holding groups together, literally, some of them for years, to help them to win some of the big things that they need to do. We call it the Making the Case call, and we are on that consistently. So let's talk about, when I start my conversations, I like to talk a little bit about the moment that we're in. I like to do a little context setting. And I like to show y'all, so anybody know the Wolf Blitzer has a show on CNN called The Situation Room? Okay, I don't really watch the show, but I love the idea of being in the situation room. I just feel like if y'all think about this room, we are in a situation room, y'all. There's some things that we're gonna need to figure out today. And so there's an English trilogy. In fact, a couple of weeks ago when Eddie and I and Mark, where's Mark around the room? Folks met a couple of weeks ago. We were reminded of the sort of English trilogy around describing the situation that you're in. It's a little bit of a curse and blessing. And folks will say, for example, the English trilogy, the first one is, may you live in interesting times. May you live in interesting times. I think I would like things to be a little less interesting right now. I think I'm good on interesting. I think we're good on that. The second part of the trilogy is, may you get what you've asked for. And actually the translation is something like, may the gods give you the thing that you prayed for. Because some of y'all are praying for stuff. I'm just being facetious. But it really is. I think for many of us, we've prayed for a long time and talking about sort of social justice issues in institutions and how we wanted to dismantle unjust systems, the things that are not working well, right? For the work that we do, we've been talking about we need to dismantle that and start over. Yeah, we are dismantling. The challenge is that we want the opportunity to build back better, to build those systems in ways that actually do deliver the things that our communities need. The last one, right, in that trilogy is, may you come to the attention of those in power. Oh boy. Yeah, that's a tough one. We are at the attention of those in power. Some of us, again, want a little less attention right now for those in power. But one of the things I really love about this one is when we think about those in power, we often think about, large administration and people who have titles, but we don't think about folks who are really the folks in power, which are people, right? The power really is in community, but oftentimes we get talked out of our power, so we don't actually remember that actually we are the ones who hold power. And as I'm gonna talk about in the conversation today, a major part of our role as community quarterback organizations is to help talk people back into that power. And not just as a thing to do because it's nice to do, but because that's the thing that actually helps us make the case for the work that we need to get done. So let's start our conversation today. So first of all, I'm gonna say something that you already know, which is most of the solutions that are really powerful in our communities really happen in unlikeliest places, right? Talk about ground truth. Most of the stuff that we're seeing that's really powerful is stuff that's bubbling up from the ground in the unlikeliest places, like the flower that just shows up in the middle of the concrete, and you're like, how did you even get there? What was it that landed you in that particular place? And I want to say as quarterback organizations, we are literally blooming in some of the toughest circumstances with all this concrete around us, but still managing to bring life and energy, right, to a space that really wasn't exactly designed for it, but we have decided to do what? To bloom where we're planted, to decide to bloom in the place that we've been planted. And here's the thing that I hope we also know is that we don't always get to choose the terrain for our thriving, right? We didn't choose that terrain. We didn't choose to have to bloom, right, in the conditions in which we find ourselves. We didn't choose that, but we still have to choose to bloom there. And I will say, a lot of the work that I do in case making is about narrative change and how you tell stories that help people really understand the lessons that you want people to embody. So I'm gonna tell a lot of stories today to help us really get the ways in which we can make a stronger case for the work that we do and bring more champions forward to support it. And I'm gonna start at a place that probably many of you, if you think back in your own lives, you have somebody in your life who taught you a little bit about gardening, about the beautifulness of what it looks like to garden. I'm gonna tell you about my story about my grandmother as a way of beginning a conversation about how we make the case for our organizations. So my grandmother, there came a point in time when she was wanting to rent a new apartment. Actually, it was a little small house. I'm from Detroit. And we had gone with the landlord to see the place. So we get to the house, and it's a little shot. For those of you who know Detroit, a lot of these small little shotgun houses. Anybody from Detroit? Anybody? Okay, I got one in Detroit. You know what I'm talking about. Little shotgun houses, not much to it. You can like literally stand in the front, right, and look all the way to the back. And so we did the tour of the little house, and the landlord said, okay, you're gonna take it or not? And my grandmother said, yeah, I like it, but I need a place to garden. I need to find a place for my vegetables. And the landlord said to my grandmother, listen, lady, I don't know. There's no place to garden around here. It is what it is. Take it or leave it. So she said, let me walk around the house again. I just got to find some place for my vegetables. So we walk around the house, and she finds this little space, like literally on the side of the house between the two houses. My Detroit, you'll know what I'm talking about. Between the houses, and there really wasn't much space, but there was enough just for a little patch of whatever. And so the landlord said to my grandmother, listen, lady, that ground is as hard as concrete. You're not going to get nothing to grow there. I'm not promising you that. You get the house, that's it. And my grandmother looked at that piece of land, and she said, no, I can grow something there. I'm good. So she rents the apartment, and my grandmother was a maid. She was a domestic worker. So she goes to work, and she's doing that. And on the weekends, she would have me and all of my other cousins out there on this patch of land with a rake, literally trying to get the topsoil off of this dirt so she can plant something there. And it is not budging. It literally is concrete. And so every Saturday, we're out there basically raking concrete, looking all kind of crazy, right? And it got to the point where some of the neighborhood kids started to tease us about being out there doing that. And so I went to my grandmother and I said, Grandma, the kids are they're talking about us, they're teasing us. I don't want you to. And not only were kids doing that, but some of the ladies in the neighborhood, they were walking past. And they weren't laughing at her, but they were just, as sometimes people do, that her name was Honora. And they would say, there's Honora out there raking on that concrete. And they would kind of walk past. And I said, Grandma, people are laughing at us. And so my grandma said, don't worry, I'm going to get out there and do it. You see it. And I said, okay. But she didn't make us go out there anymore. She was out there every Saturday doing her thing. And then there came one of these summer storms, and if you're from Michigan or even anywhere in the Midwest, we get these ugly summer storms. The tornadoes come and wrapping around, and the trees are thrashing around and coming down and all this other kind of stuff. And so there came to be a time when there was one of these storms, and my grandmother rushed us down to the basement. I said, y'all stay down in the basement. I got to go back upstairs and do something. I don't know, do y'all have basements in Houston? They have basements in Houston? I don't know, this part of the world? How many of you know what I'm talking about when I say basement? Okay, all right, y'all know what I'm talking about. So we go down to the basement, and we're down there for about 20 minutes, and my grandmother doesn't come back, and so we get nervous, because it's thrashing outside, the power's gone out, so we're nervous and afraid as kids. So we go back upstairs, looking all around the house for my grandmother, and she cannot be found. And then one of us said, look, the grandma's on the side of the house. What is she doing? And so we look out the window. We all like literally nose pressed up against the window. And she is out there raking the topsoil off of this little patch of whatever it is. And she'll rake, and then there's so much rain coming down so fast, that'll get saturated, and she rakes that up. And she's going down to different levels of this terrain. And then she takes a handful of seeds, she throws it in the ground, and then she's pushing the seeds down with the heel of her shoe, into the ground, right? And then she'll put stuff on. And she's doing this out there for at least half an hour. And we're watching her, and as kids, we think she has absolutely gone crazy. Our grandmother, she is lost it now. And so she comes back in half an hour later, and she is soaking wet with the biggest grin on her face I have ever seen my grandmother have. And she said, I planted my seeds. The ground is right. I planted my seeds. Happy as a clam. About 4 weeks later, maybe 5 weeks later, stuff starts sprouting out of her, all kind of stuff. And because she had to do it so willy-nilly, stuff was sprouting up everywhere. A cucumber was coming up next to a piece of lettuce, was coming up next to a piece of zucchini. It was just everywhere. And so, there was so much that was coming up, because she just threw a bunch of seeds down. There was so much coming up that it was actually more than we could eat. So she set up a little table outside of the house with a little sign, a little small card table that said, take what you need. And so all the ladies, many of them, would walk past that table, walk past my grandmother and laughed at her, right? We're now asking her what was on the table, what could they take? And she was so proud. She was so proud to be talking about her vegetables on that table and what people could take. that I've never seen her as the strongest person in my life, more excited about what she was able to bring to that community. Now, many of you probably have a story like that in your own families about somebody who was just strong about gardening and all that kind of stuff. But that's a real important lesson for us in the work that we do around case making. I could say a lot about faith and timing, right? My grandmother was able to say even before the circumstances looked like there was going to be a garden, she saw the potential in that. Even when other people were laughing, they didn't see it, they didn't want to go out and work it. She stayed steadfast to do that. But also she didn't even know the timing of when it was going to be the time to do that, to harvest anything there. She didn't know when the storm was going to come or when it was going to be appropriate time to do that. She just knew that eventually, if she waited long enough for one of those good summer storms, there was going to be a moment for her, right, to throw those seeds. So part of the lesson I want to say to us too is we have to be able and willing to throw the seeds even when those storms happen. This was the middle of a tornado. This was not just it's raining outside, it's a little wind. This was the middle of a tornado, but she knew that there was an opportunity in that season, in that storm, right, to harvest the thing that she's been wanting and that she said to the landlord she was going to be able to do. The reason I bring that story up is because we are in the middle of a storm, y'all. Do y'all know that? Y'all don't know that. Y'all know that we're in the middle of a storm? We are in the middle of a storm, and I'm talking about this thing right here. It's not just a regular summer storm. This is a tornado. And there's some folks who would say to you in the middle of the storm, listen, don't be bold in this moment. Don't say the thing that you're supposed to clean those websites, right, for language. Some folks will say, don't say the thing that needs to be said. Don't, right, moderate what you say and how you say it. There's some folks who would say, bring that in because the storm will eat you up. And what I want to say to you is even in the midst of that, you have to throw the seeds anyway. Like this is actually the season when we have the ability to water something great. It just looks like it's a storm, right, and an opposition, but it really is our opportunity if we would lean into it. So first of all, as we think about this, the storm that we're facing is really tough. This is probably, if you're thinking about the community development space, and I've been in community development for a long time, this is going to be probably our most challenging season. But if we're open to it, it is probably the richest season, like the season that we actually have to leverage the absolute best of what we bring to the table. I was working with a group just this week, actually. We were talking, helping to make the case for the thing that they're trying to do. And they were talking about this very issue, about trying to get more resources into their organization. And they were like, yeah, it's hard. And I'm like, listen, in this season, there is $60 trillion of commercial capital that's just been pulled out of the stock market because folks are nervous and afraid. What is it? Warren Buffett, the head of Berkshire Hathaway, pulled almost all of their resources literally out of the stock market. And all of that capital is looking for a place to land. They're not going to put it in cryptocurrency, I can tell you that much, right? They're not going to put it in Bitcoin. That capital, $60 trillion, is looking for a place to land. And I'm looking at a room full of airstrips. I'm looking at a room, right, for the places for that money to land. And we're talking about how you make the case to commercial lenders and commercial capital that we are listen, in this season, we are the best investment you're going to get, right? There's a huge opportunity in this moment, folks. Folks will tell you that this is not good for us. Oh, this is great for us if you know how to make the case in a season that is tough, right? The question is, do we have the skills to do that? And I want to say, it's not just about having isolated flowers in the middle of concrete. We can certainly grow, if we have to, in the middle of concrete, but the real flex, and flex is what my teenagers say stuff like that. The real flex, Mom. The real flex is when you get to move from isolated flowers to community garden, where you've got a whole lot of folks are thriving. And the only way to get to that is you got to break up some of that concrete around it. You got to break it up. Here's the good news for us. There is a worldwide movement happening right now to depave, like pavers, depave. There's a worldwide movement around, literally, I'm not making this stuff up, across the world for a lot of reasons. One, because concrete is probably one of the worst kind of polluting materials you can possibly try and make and install. It's awful for the environment. It doesn't work well for Mother Earth. And it's also not very healthy for us. As human beings, we need to see greenery. They will say that if you've got a whole range of ailments, mental and emotional stuff, one of the best things you can do is do what? Do what? Go out in nature. That's one of the best things you can do for your mental and emotional health. In fact, when I was in Boston many years ago, they took the entire freeway system. They needed to widen the freeway because they came through Boston. They took the entire freeway and located underground and put greenery all on top of it. It's called the Big Dig. Now, there were some challenges with the Big Dig. We're going to talk about the challenges with that project. But the goal of depaving, of removing some of the stuff that's not helpful, breaking up some of that pavement so that other things can thrive is really important. And I'm not using that as just a way to talk about gardens and actual flowers and things like that. If you read things like, many things, but if you read Heather McGee's book, or some of us, she talks about that very thing, right? When she's talking about the swimming pools. In the 1960s, many people didn't want to desegregate pools. They didn't want Black and brown kids being able to go to public pools. And so rather than share that space, they decided to do what? They literally drained those pools and filled them up with concrete. Literally. That's not the first thing. It's also things like the urban renewal programs for many of our cities where we've come from in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s, when they needed to move the freeway through many of those communities. You know what they did? They really tore down lots of thriving communities, Black and brown communities, to bring the freeway out so that people can go out to the suburbs and build new houses there. But that same notion of breaking up life and thriving with concrete is huge for us to understand the reason why we have to break that up. Now, I want to say, for those of you who are in this room who are systems change folks, I hope there are many of you, because this is what you do, what you all do every day. There's a model for that. FSG Consulting, many of you know their collective impact model, has described what it looks like, literally, to break up that concrete, the systems that are unjust and not working with us well, so that we can plant the things that are really much more helpful. And they talk about the kind of 6 things you got to be able to change and do. You got to be able to change policies. We know that. You got to be able to change the practices, things like redlining that are not working well for our communities. You have to be able to bring more resources. You got to have capital invested, right? You also got to change the relationships and connections that people have, the community that you're building. And you got to change some of those power dynamics. You got to get more folks who feel like they have access, right, to the position, not the positions of power, but it's certainly the conversations that are powerful. And there's something else. So this last one, notice that it's shaped a little different. Y'all notice that? Y'all notice that? That last one's a little different. I think of that one as, and you look at the pointiness of it, it's that if you think about what you have to do to break up concrete, the sort of jackhammers, right, that kind of get into concrete, that one right there is a real big one. That's a huge one. We don't do that one very well. We haven't done that one very well, and that's been a sticking point. That's probably, as they say, the most powerful player on the board, and the one that we struggle with the most, changing mental models. We struggle with that. Nicole Hannah-Jones, who was the architect of the 1619 Project, talks about that. She's like, we have been able historically to move policy, we've been moved practices, we've even been able to reinvest in communities that have been disinvested, we've been able to do a whole lot of things. But the thing that we just have not cracked is changing the hearts and minds of folks so that they get that there's a different way that we could be relating to one another. That this thing called capitalism doesn't have to show up in this particular way. We haven't been able to do that. One of my good friends, Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy, some of you have been to the lynching memorial he's done, been the ED of the Equal Justice Institute for many years, just a fantastic human being. Yes, talks about this. And he says, listen, we've been able to do a lot of policy practices, yada, yada, but we haven't been able to reshape this narrative of racial difference. And because of that, we are literally replaying this thing over and over and over again. Kind of like Groundhog Day. Anybody ever see the movie Groundhog Day? Where you just keep going over the same ground every day, right? The same thing around the civil rights. We won civil rights, look like we're gonna have to go back and win it again. We won reproductive rights, we're gonna have to go back and win them again. We won women's rights, we're gonna have to do it again. Even in terms of, I was talking to my good friends at Landon, we were talking about this in Florida. A new piece of legislation is making its way, I don't know if it's passed or not, around child labor laws, right? Opening up the opportunity for employers to employ young people full-time, and the reason is because so many families are struggling, they can't make ends meet, and so the brilliant idea is to remove the barriers from kids being able to work full-time jobs. no matter what season. The law was that when the schools were in session, there was only a certain number of hours they could work. But no, remove that. Let them work as much as they want to. Are you kidding me? See, I thought a long time ago we had made the decision as the most prosperous nation in the world that we could afford to allow our kids to go to school, to dream big, to learn stuff, to innovate, to just do that. I thought we had won that. But if you don't change the hearts and minds of folks around that, you're going to have to relive it over and over again. So here we are, 100 years after I think the initial legislation around child labor laws were put in place. Here we are having to go back and win again. That. Or the idea of a public education system. See, I thought we had decided that that we needed to give all kids a decent education. I thought did y'all think we had decided that? Did y'all think we had that locked down? Like, we got that locked down. Yeah. Or the right to vote. I thought we had all decided that having everybody vote was a good thing. No. So here's the thing, and here's what I want to say about that. There's a way to do this, right? I'm a social scientist. There's a way to do this that comes out of the social science that we need to lean into a lot. I want to talk about that. I have a new book that's coming out called Fast Track, where it talks about, the first part of it is talking about narrative strategy and how do you change people's energy in their hearts and minds around things. And one of the first chapters in that book is called Santa Claus is Real. And I'm gonna share it with you, and I'm gonna talk about there's relationship to narrative change. This is my son, Madhu. When he was he's now a teenager in college, first year in college this year. But this was a time when we were going to deposit his letter to Santa to send to the North Pole, and he was so proud. My kids were small. We did Christmas. I mean, we were that family that the day after Thanksgiving, like, we put up all the lights. Our house is like a big, with Santa Claus and reindeer, and we do it all of them things, nativity scene. We do it all, right? Inside the house, we got big tree, we got garland, we got candy canes. We do the whole thing. The kids, weeks before Christmas, back in those days, I don't know if y'all know this, but they used to send circulars to the house, like the Toys R Us would send these little papers. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Okay. They would send circulars to the house, and the kids would get the circular. They would circle the things they wanted Santa Claus to bring, and they'd be studying the papers like, Lego man. And they would be going at it. And then they would write these long letters to the North Pole, and we'd mail them and send them off. And then the night before, obviously, our Christmas celebration, they would make, chocolate chip cookies and make the chocolate milk. And we would even put carrots out for the reindeer. But we're not leaving out the reindeer. Reindeer are important, people. So we would do all of that. It was a scene. We get into this thing. And there came a point in time where one day, I don't know, I think he was probably about 8, maybe 9. He comes home running into the house with his younger brother. Mom, Eli said that Santa Claus is not real. And his little brother, who was then about 5, looks at him and goes, what? Santa Claus is not real? What? And so there is sheer panic at my doorstep. And so at that moment, as a parent, I'm thinking, okay, the jig is up. I got to sit my kids down and let's have a conversation. So I sit them down on the couch and I say, okay, guys, listen. Yeah, so this thing called Santa Claus is really your dad and I. We, look at the letters and things you want. We go buy the gifts the night before. Y'all make the cookies. Whatever. Your dad and I, we eat the cookies. We drink the chocolate milk. We put the carrots back in the refrigerator. And then we go and put your gifts out. And we do that because we want you to have this amazing experience when you get up the next morning. We do that for you because we want you to have that. But actually, in reality, Santa Claus is not real. And so my sons, they look at me, and they look at each other, and they look at me, and they look at each other. And then almost in unison, without any conversation amongst themselves, they look at each other and they say, no, Santa Claus is real. Santa Claus is real. And they walk away. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting there and I'm going, what just happened? I thought we were having a truth-telling moment where I was giving them the truth and they have decided for themselves. And that Christmas, we celebrated Santa. We left out the cookies. We left out the chocolate milk. Kids went to bed, and Santa Claus came that night. And it wasn't until the following year or my older son, Madhu, was in a group of kids that were just even slightly older, where the pressure around the Santa Claus thing was really mounting. And the kids were saying, "Oh, you're a baby if you believe in Santa Claus." And all of a sudden, Santa Claus was not real anymore. He wasn't having that. And we had to figure out some different traditions. So you may be asking yourself, Dr. T, why are you talking about Santa Claus and Christmas? Because there are a lot of lessons in here for narrative change folks about the stuff that we need to do to address some of that mindset shift stuff that we know is really necessary for our models to work. Number one, it wasn't that my kids just loved the idea of the Santa Claus. They never even met this mythical creature called Santa Claus. They didn't, and if they really thought about it, it probably didn't make any sense. It wasn't that they wanted so much to believe in Santa Claus as a thing. It's that they loved the energy and the community we had created around it, right? It was the community building. It was all the stuff, and being able to go to the mall and sit on Santa Claus's lap and write the letters and do the thing. And it was all that. And they thought that if they gave up the idea of a Santa Claus, that they were going to have to give that stuff up. And they didn't want to do it. They decided for themselves, we want the cookies, we want all of that. And it wasn't until they wanted to get into a different community where the respect of being in this other community was strong enough that it pulled them out of that misinformation. What I want to say to you about that is you are not going to reason people out of stuff they did not reason themselves into. Yeah? Can I get you on that? You're not going to reason people out of that. You're not going to do it. The way to get people out of this, and I'm a social scientist, so we study this, the way to get people out of misinformation, right, is not to put a fact sheet in front of them, do a fact-telling moment, is to bring them into a community where there's the traditions built around that's strong enough that they want to be part of it, and the only way to be part of that is to lean into a different belief set. And I say that because we are dealing with that. A lot of the belief systems around the communities that we have, the who deserves what, who needs what, who deserves to be part of our community, who's got papers and who don't have papers, and who needs to get a job, and all of that stuff, right, is not going to be solved by your fact sheets. All this, the misinformation around vaccines and what they're supposed to do and the health stuff is not going to be solved by your fact sheets or your reports that come on the news. It's not going to be solved by that. It gets solved by building community. And the good news for this room, I speak to a great many rooms, but the good news about folks in this room is y'all know how to build community. And I'm not talking about community that's just come to our meeting to talk about vaccines or come to our meeting to talk about what's happening here. It's come to our community to do the work of bridging with people, to bridge the divide around things like the stuff I was talking about with Kaboom, right? Where you just bring people together for the purposes of putting together a playground, right? Putting together something where people from all walks of life across your communities, people who know you and love you, and people who don't like you, don't know you, and have no interest in you except where they want to build a playground, or they want to participate in the farmer's market, or they want to come and be part of something that they think is fun. And when people get in community with you, right, there's a different conversation that you're able to have with them that pulls them out of that misinformation. There was a study that was just done with 85-year study, 700 people over 85 years. I love this one, the big universities do this. We have found, this new study has just confirmed, community is the way forward. You're like, everybody in this room was like, and we told you that. But the idea that community is really the ultimate medicine for everything. Yeah, we told you that, right? But it's also us getting really sharp about how we do that. I was sharing just in my Lift Orlando college just last week, this group called Warm Cookies for the Revolution in Denver, who does a marvelous job of this. Their whole thing is bringing people together around the craziest, zaniest things, not for the purposes of convincing them about anything, but for the purposes of building community. Right, John Powell out at the Belonging Institute, and also I heard this a lot from Bob Putnam, who wrote the book Bowling Alone, talks about this. In fact, Bob Putnam has a Netflix special called Join or Die. I don't so much like that title, but I get it. What he's trying to say is that what's breaking down in this country is not people's political affiliation and this or that. What's breaking down are the bonds of connection. The level of social isolation is serious. And when folks are going online and they're reading all this stuff and they're getting themselves into these communities that are telling them all these conspiracy theories, they're not buying the conspiracy theory. What they're buying is what? The community that's being created in that. So our antidote to that is to build community around the things that we are doing. That's fun, that's exciting, the farmer's market, the come out for the cookies, come out for the kids, come out for the whatever that is the stuff when you get a community with folks that bridges across some of the divides we're talking about. That's how you get at that mindset shift stuff. So my next conversation is build community. And I want to say, when we talk about this, that is literally like throwing seeds. My grandmother talked about the seeds, right, into the ground. You're seeding things that you don't even know what may pop out of there when you put together just an opportunity for folks to come and have warm cookies, build cookie, whatever it is, right? But you're going to harvest stuff out of that ground that is incredible. On the table there are these seed packets. I want you to take that seed packet. And if you look on the back of there, is all the stuff I'm going to talk about today. Throw the seeds anyway. Build community. And I'm going to talk a little bit about talking people back into their power. How many of you have seen the movie A Man Called Otto? Anybody seen that movie? Yeah. I love that. Listen, I'm a movie buff, and I travel so much on planes and trains and everything else that when I'm on planes, I watch movies all the time while I'm working because it just helps to, make those plane rides a little shorter in my head, at least. And one of the things that I saw in this movie was something that I think we do really well that we need some more intentional practice around, and it's talking people back into their power. There's a scene in the movie where the main character, Otto, who's this kind of curmudgeon person, he's a little bit of a community curmudgeon. And Marisol is one of the women she lives in the neighborhood across the street, and she's just this kind of energizer bunny who's just full of community building. That's literally what she does in the community. And he doesn't like it, but she is so engaging that he just can't help being sort of brought into the web of what she's doing in that community. And there's a point at which she is just she needs to learn how to drive. She's got 2 kids, she's pregnant. Her husband can't drive her around anymore. She doesn't know how to drive. And so Otto said, listen, come on, I'm tired of driving you around. I'm going to teach you how to drive. And so she decides, okay, all right, I probably need to do that. So they get in the car, and first of all, he has a stick shift car. How many of you learned to drive on a stick shift? Okay, so y'all know the struggle is real. And I learned to drive on a stick shift too. So she gets in the car, and she's trying. Stick shift is nothing, learning on stick shift. Some of y'all may have forgotten now that many of us drive automatic car, but it's nothing to be fooling around. You got the clutch and the brake and the accelerator pedal, you got the gear shift, it's a lot going on right there. And she quickly gets flustered, and cars behind her are honking, move out of the way. And she gets flustered, and she can't, and she's also pregnant, so she's got a belly, and she's trying, but she can't navigate all the different things that are happening. And he's not the most, let's say, patient kind of teacher. He's not really teaching her, he's just kind of like, go. And so at a point, she just breaks down. She just breaks down in tears. She just can't take it. I can't do this. And he stops and he says, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You came to this country, you didn't even know the language, you learned the language. You went and got a degree, a bachelor's degree, you went and got a master's degree, you basically run the entire community, you got 2 kids, you run this, you do that, you and she starts going through all of the things that she literally has been able to do in her life. And as she's talking, her disposition starts to change. And she sits there for a second, and her shoulders kind of push a little back. She takes a deep breath. She puts her hand on the wheel, hand on the gear shift. She looks up, and she eases off. That's Hollywood, folks. In Hollywood, that's the way. Now, for you and I, for most of y'all who learned how to drive on a stick shift, it didn't quite go that way. But Hollywood does it. But the point of that is the way that he did that, right? I gotta tell you that in this season, y'all, we're gonna have to talk a lot of people back into their power, because I would say the purpose of the way that I'm not gonna get into political discussion, but I would just say the purpose for how some of these changes are being rolled out and the way that they're being done is specifically for the purpose of stripping people's sense of power away from them. We're gonna have to do a lot in this season to talk people back into their power. And the good news is, if you look around you, there are lots of examples for how to do that, but helping people remember when they did extraordinary things, right, with ordinary capabilities, right, is amazing. Talking people back into that is super important. My brother is a coach, a basketball coach for high school in Miami, a public school system. And I can tell you, he will tell you right now, at the halftime, when you are down like 20 points and you have to go back into the huddle, the thing you don't want to say is, yeah, it's rough, y'all. Y'all getting beat down today, y'all. It is rough. What does a coach say when you get back to the huddle? When things don't look exactly how they have planned it. Right? Coach gets back and says, come on, y'all, listen, we planned for this. We got a strategy. Here's what we got to do. And they start talking strategy and getting people back. Yeah, come on, y'all. 1, 2, 3, go. All right, right? Which enables folks to get themselves together and get back to the work that the power, right, of the strategy they know they've been building. Even if they lose, who cares? We're going to give it all we got. What do they say? Leave it on the court? We're going to leave everything we got right there, right? I'm a church-going woman. That's a part of it. People go to church from my vantage point, church on Sunday. Because during the week, you might get beaten down, but Sunday, whoo. There's a different conversation that happens that gets you ready, right, back in the game. So Monday morning, you can stand up and have a different conversation with the people in your life that you need to be able to do that. Well, the same is true of community building, and y'all know that. Margaret Mead once talked about this, that the only thing that ever really changes anything is getting people into their power, right? And having them decide what's about to happen in that community. That's the only thing that ever changes things, and we know how to do that. The thing I want to also impart with you today is we have to get super intentional, not just about talking to people in our communities back into their power, but we have to get super intentional about how we talk people in our case making, right? How are you talking to legislators? How are you talking to the social impact investors? How are you talking to the other not-for-profits in your community? How are you talking to the small business leaders who don't often think that they have the power to help you change and shift what's happening in our community? You got to talk them into their power too, as an intentional part of the way that you're making the case for change. Samara and I are doing a workshop just after this, we're going to talk about that. How do you imbue like that energy, right, of talking people back into their power in the middle of your case making? And what does that require? What does that look like? Right, when you got to say, listen, I know it's in the business community where you are, whether it's Orlando or anybody else, we've done a lot of things in Orlando. We've done this, we've done that, and that. And also, if we don't figure out how to make this work, we're not going to be able to leverage all the other pieces the dreams and aspirations that we have for our city. We have to solve for this. This is part of the journey, and we can do it. That kind of talking people back into their power is super important, and we have to get super intentional about that. So this is an interesting one, ground truth. And I kind of really, is ground truth, and I would say, I'm going to talk about it in a second, ground truth and legacy is probably another part of this. You ever been to a meeting where it was a really polite meeting, but the stuff that really needed to be said really wasn't able to be said, and so everybody was kind of whispering on the sideline like, yeah, because what they really need to say, yeah. What that means is that that's not a safe space for ground truth, and it's bad. If the ground truth of your community has to live later in the women's room or the bathroom, or it gets talked about at the bar, but not in the center space, you're in trouble because you're not hearing the thing that you need that would actually pull people forward, okay? You're not hearing the stuff that's ground truth. But there's another piece of this that's really important for our case making that I'm not sure that we always all get about why this is important. This is a part of one of the pages of the census data. For me, I've been for many years, probably for the last 15 years or so, I've been doing a lot of genealogy with my family. And in the census data, there's a lot of information. I want to be able to trace my family back and all the different things. And they have so much information on Ancestry.com and all these other things that you can go and trace back. You can put your little DNA sample in there and they tell you who you're related to. And actually about that, you put your little DNA in there and then it tells you some people that you're related to by DNA. And then they start to contact you. And some people can show up in your DNA that you didn't know was in your DNA. And you start meeting sisters and brothers and cousins that you didn't know you had. That DNA thing is a trip. I've met so many people that I didn't know were my relatives. I found out, my mother found a sister who was literally lived around the block from us, she didn't know was her. Yeah, we're not gonna go there. My grandfather, bless his heart. We just gonna bless him and just keep him on. But you find a lot of people you didn't know was in your DNA that are in your DNA. We're not going to talk about that today. But the piece of this that I want to share with you is there's also a column in all the census data that goes back all the way to the 1800s. And there's a column in there that's labeled H, or R? Anybody know what the H or R stands for? Anybody look at that? H or an R? And this is all the way back to when they first started creating the census. I mean, literally, you can go back to the 1800s and find this. An H or an R. I think this one is from, the 1920s of my family, where I would go back and find my grandmother when she's 6 years old, back in Shaw's, Mississippi. And next to every member of our family is an R. And one of the things that happened is I went through every generation of my family. One of the things that I saw was an R. R stands for renter. H is for homeowner. The census has categorized that for every single decade. And I was shocked when I started to go back through census records, because in every single decade of my family's history, always an R, never an H. Now, intellectually, I knew that. We were usually renters, but there was something about that just, I don't know, but it just, that got in my soul. I don't know, but that thing right there hurt me. To have family members. My grandmother was a maid, a domestic worker. Probably most of the folks in this, I don't know if there are any billionaires here, so most of us probably come from families where our parents or grandparents' parents worked really hard. And when I look back at old pictures of my family, I can always look at the hands of my family, my grandmother, her grandmother, and they're always really tough, hardened from doing hard work. And to look at my family and to see that, to have worked that hard, and to never have owned anything, ever, never, not one H, no matter what part of the tree I went to, not one H, never. I don't know about you, but that hurt me in my soul. And a part of what I decided many years ago that would be my legacy for my family, when you go back to the census for my family, you're going to always see an H. And I can tell you that as I stand here today, every single member of my family, when we take the census, H next to every single person. That's my legacy. Now, I will say, we're struggling hard to hold on to those houses, right? We're struggling hard, even in Detroit. The houses aren't very expensive, but most of them, they need some work. In fact, my 80-year-old uncle needed a roof repair, and he didn't want to ask anybody in the family to get his roof repaired. He crawled on the top of his roof with a tarp to put on his roof and fell off the darn thing in his old. Bless his little heart. He's okay. He got a little banged up, but was a little startled. So I don't want to say that it's a panacea, but what I'm saying is, for me, that's the legacy that I want to leave to my family. And here's the lesson for us. The strongest case for justice you're going to be able to make is to pair two things: ground truth and legacy. I don't care who it is. When you put those two things together, you got a whole different kind of conversation going. Even if you look historically, things like the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act was not passed in 1968. It didn't pass because people had a revelation about the importance of fair housing and the importance of how it passed. Actually, anybody know why that passed in 1968? Why the Fair Housing Act passed? It wasn't going to pass except for the fact that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And Lyndon B. Johnson, and you can read his papers, said to his team, I am not going to let this be my legacy. Y'all are not going to say I was the president on which, at that time, 107 cities were literally on fire after the assassination of Dr. King. And Lyndon B. Johnson literally said, I'm going to force these people to pass this. That's not going to be my legacy. And literally, within 9 days or 10 days of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, he forced, legislators to pass that legislation. We can go on and talk about the ways in which some ground truth along with legacy moves people, right? In a way that you can't talk people into this stuff. You can't, literally, even, how many people have seen the movie Hidden Figures? Hidden Figures, right? Yeah, right? Or the women who were in NASA, The same thing, and there's a scene in that movie too, which is true, with a woman who needs to take that class to go she has one class left and she has to take it. And the only place she can take the class is at a high school that's for whites only. So she literally has to go to court to ask a judge to let her go to school to get the course. And this is in 1960 or something, even before the civil rights movement really got into its full heyday. And when she goes to the judge is like, listen, lady, I'm not gonna give you permission to do that. You're wasting your time. And she says, can I get permission to approach the bench? And you can go back in the movie and see this, but you can also go on the historical record. And she goes to the judge, and she's standing in front of the judge, and she says, he thinks she's about to go off into a whole thing about how, Black people deserve to have an education, we want to be free, blah, 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 all the other stuff. And she says, you were the first person in your family to ever go to college. You were the first person to ever go to the Naval Academy, first in your class. You were the first person to ever get on the bench. And you were the first person. And she goes to this list of stuff. And he says to her, okay, so you've done your homework. So what? And she said, because I'm the first person in my family. And she goes through all the stuff of where she's first. So she's making that kind of connection, right? And then he says, okay, yeah, I got it. And then she gets to the part about legacy. She said, of all the cases that you have on your docket today, which one of those cases is going to make you the first? Which one of those cases are people going to be reading about 100 years from now because of what you do in this courtroom today? Which one of those cases is going to make you the subject of jurisprudence 200 years from now? Which one of those? And she goes down this list, and this judge who has no interest in what she's talking about or what she wants to do, yeah. And he says to her, okay, listen, take that class. Only the night class is gone, right? But what I want to say to y'all is, he wasn't about to rule in her favor because he understood and cared so much about her trajectory as a person who was educated enough to have a job. What he thought about was the legacy that he wanted to leave, and also the ground truth of that moment. That is the thing that pulled him over that to move forward. There was a study run by the Center for Community Investment where they talked about what are the things that made these big capital investors make these transformational investments in community. Like, what is the thing that made their institutions and their leaders decide to make that kind of investments? And the number one thing they talked about, the leaders of those organizations talked about their legacy, what they wanted to be able to lead with, why this was important to them. I'm not sure we bring enough of that into our case making when we're talking to people about why they should invest in who we are, why this is an important moment. I would love if they all just said, we want to do this because it's important, because we believe in equity and inclusion, because we believe that the beloved community, because we believe in that. I would love it if they did. But a lot of these folks come across the threshold on the basis of ground truth and legacy. And when we understand how to wield that, we get a different conversation. So I'm going to end by talking a little bit about what we're going to talk about in my session today. Let's go through a little bit of slides. And I want to talk about case making, the ability to pull people forward, folks who like us, some who don't, some who are interested in our work, some who maybe not, doesn't matter. There are ways to build bridges to get people to understand the basics of what we do and why it matters as to lean forward. And some of the way that we have been trying to get people to lean forward, right, doesn't work so well, in part because what we know from evidence is that it's sometimes counterintuitive. The thing that you think would actually pull people forward is not the thing, right? And so we had to talk about this conversation about how you do things like get people to have a sense of stake in what you do, right? If you're coming to save me because you think you're saving me, it's not going to be helpful. It's charity. But if you're coming to help me because you think we both are moving forward, that's about having stake in the work that we're doing. And when you have stake in it, that's not charity, that's an investment, right? If there's no stake in it, they think they're giving you charity. We don't want charity. I want you to invest in this, to have a sense of stake in what we're doing. And part of the way that I do that, ground truthing, getting you into legacy, building power with you, right? Having you really talking people back into their power, really understanding that. And in fact, there are multiple principles for how you do that in the case statement that you put forward to get people to move forward. For the folks who are coming to the strategic session today, I'm going to walk folks through this. Like, what are the things you got to do? Have that sense of stake is number one, right? Connect to people's aspiration, build a big wheel around it. That's all about legacy. How do you get people in the room, in the conversation, feeling like they have a stake in it? How do you get people into urgency around this stuff and to get people in their sense of power and agency about it? How do you tell people, remind people what they lose if they don't show up for y'all? Remind these folks, here's what you're gonna lose if you don't show up. Some of y'all, I'm gonna say some of those folks are so afraid of diversity that they, what they should be concerned about is dictatorship, right? Let's tell them, listen, right? Having a conversation about moving those mental models and mindsets shifts out of the way. Things totally solutions forward. I don't even want you all talking about the problems that exist. Move that out of the way. We're going to be completely 100% solutions focused. I want to credential that 100%. You want people walking out of the room knowing more about the solution than they even know about the problem. Turning that on its head is really important. Getting people to think about systems and systems change and what that requires. I don't really care about who's in the White House and who's in this house. I don't really care. What I care about is the systems, right, that they're presiding over are unjust. And how do we create systems, right, that change and modify what we're seeing in communities? I was going to say something bad, but I won't say it. How do we think about storytelling, right? How do we talk about, how do we do a more impactful job of telling our story and being thoughtful? And some of us believe that the way to tell stories is we talk about the recipients or the communities that we're in, but the story of us is a bigger conversation that includes not just the people in our communities, but a whole range of folks. So how do we tell bigger stories? How do we shift power? How do we build trust and clarify our value proposition? A lot of us, we were just talking about that a couple weeks ago at Lift Orlando, and we were just talking about value proposition stuff, and I was saying, making the case, talking about this issue, that your value is context driven. Your value to a person who's a social impact investor is very different from the value of you to a policymaker, very different from the value of you to a community, to a group of community residents. Some of that may be in common, but a lot of it is different. So how do you understand your value proposition in that kind of dynamic way so that you can make the case for what you do? And then finally, having a conversation about your roadmap. How do you get there? How do you help people to understand, right, the roadmap that you're on? Because a lot of what happens is we have these big, lofty mission and goals. We're going to solve for this and we're going to do that. And then they see that we put a building here. And they're like, well, that's a building. I love the building, but I thought you said you were going to do that. You're going to solve for this and solve for that. And so our ability to create the roadmap so people can see the building on the roadmap to the bigger aspiration that as really a down payment on the bigger thing is really important. Otherwise, they don't think you delivered, right? And that's a part of why people say they don't vote. Because you told me when you wanted my vote that you were going to do these 29,000 things. You were going to give me, make sure every student went to college and and then you got in office and you did nothing. And now you want me to come back 4 years later and vote for you again. I don't know what to say about that. You didn't do the stuff you told me. But because there was no roadmap to help people understand, here are the steps to get there. We're on the road, no, we're getting there, right? I couldn't follow along the process with you, and I lost hope in what you were doing. So when you put those things together, it allows you to tell a much deeper, more robust, and more compelling story about the work that you do and the case that you're able to make around it. When you do that well, you're able to turn those isolated flowers where you're throwing your seeds, right, into larger community gardens where you get lots of thriving all across the work that you do and across the community that you're in. So I'm going to encourage you, for those of you, I'll say you want more community gardens, there are two things that are happening. The folks who are coming down to the session, we're going to talk more specifically about the case making and the new book that's coming out, is Fast Track, which talks about some of those stories. Now I want everybody in the room, if you're able to get up, stand up if you will. Stand up if you will. Shake it out. Shake your legs out, shake your legs out. Right. Shake it out. So I like to do just a kind of concluding exercise, especially around that ground truth stuff. I mean, that thing is important. Ground truth. First of all, I want you to envision that you are standing on the shoulders of the people in your community who came before you. So think of yourself as literally standing on their shoulders, right? And I want you to rock a little bit back and forth and think about yourself as standing on their shoulders. Because you wouldn't be here doing the work that you're doing if it were not for the folks you're standing on, right? So stand on their shoulders a little bit, do a little rocking back and forth, and have just a moment, right, of you thinking about that. Now I want you to think about the folks who are going to come after you, right? Whether it's in your immediate family or in your community, the folks who are going to come after you And they need strong, steady shoulders to stand on. And I want you to just think about that, the legacy that you're leaving them, right? Are your shoulders wide enough, broad enough, steady enough that they can get their balance? Yeah? Are they strong enough, wide enough they can feel it? Rock a little bit. They need you to be strong so they have somewhere to stand. So the next generation of folks in this room, right, are starting at a whole different place, that those community gardens are so broad and wide. My goodness gracious, yeah? If you will do that and stand in that, I'm standing on the shoulders and I'm positioning myself so that others can stand on my shoulders. Yeah, we're gonna do big things. Thank you very much.